I'm Francis, the artist, but in this case, I would say more like the person who started this 2 to 3 decades investigation about the whereabouts of this particular image, being the Fabiola painting. The backstory is quite simple. I mean, I was back in '94, finding myself in Belgium at the time and wanting to put together a collection of copies of iconic works, if you want. And whereas I found a couple potato eaters and Mona Lisas, I came across on the same market the same image in 2 different stands. A few weeks later, I went back to a different market and I again saw just one of these images and I decided to purchase it. But it turned out that it started appearing again periodically over the next months, years, in different parts of the world. The collection really started as a personal curiosity and a bit of a hobby, to have this kind of like repetition of the same image by different amateur painters, Sunday painters, as you call them.
She lived in the 4th century in Rome, and she married a well-to-do man who was abusive and divorced him and married again. And the second husband died. Mm-hmm. She became Christian, she converted, and then did penance for the sin of divorce. And with the money she had inherited, or she devoted her life to charitable works and founded a hospital. And then her life was written by Saint Jerome almost contemporaneously. She was canonized in the 5th century, and then basically forgotten until the Roman Catholic revival swept Europe. And in Britain, the Cardinal Wiseman, who was high in the Catholic Church, wrote this Life of Fabiola, which was given to all young girls. It became a bestseller.
The Fabiola was Jean-Jacques Henner's moment of grace. I mean, it's really the one image that will survive him. He's mostly minor figure of the even, I would say, the French 19th century art history. The original disappeared early 20th century, somewhere around 1918, 1919.
Or possibly in the San Francisco earthquake?
Possibly. So the original, it's an image that survived only through its reproduction. Would it be mechanical or would it be hand-painted? So it adds a little bit to the kind of mystery and romantic aspect of the story.
I invited Francis to make a project. We spent a lot of time thinking about what that might be, but I'd seen the presentation of a group of them at the Whitechapel in a group show in '94 perhaps, and they'd always stayed with me as a really special, interesting thing.
The object of the project was defined relatively quickly. What took much longer was the search for the proper space. And that's something particular to this project, is that we are trying to find venues that can create some kind of particular connection or have some kind of relation to the copies and to the Fabiola collection. I mean, in the case of the Byzantine Chapel, it's obvious that the original spiritual function of the space is largely the reason why it seemed appropriate, if you want.
Has to do sometimes with the function of the portrait, sometimes to do with its domestic situation as it would normally be installed, and also with the idea that it's not an artist curatorial project in the way that became a trope of the 90s. No. What's much more interesting is a sociological or anthropological questioning, like how did this come about? Why did this come about? In partly how it relates to other investigations you've made. It also adds weight to the question of what gets shown in museums by whom, and the fact that these are paintings by amateurs. Where do we draw those boundaries between professionalism and how the edges of what's part of the museum's remit change over decades. We can go back to earlier times when Museum of Modern Art was showing the work of self-taught artists quite actively in the 1930s. And I think also thinking about religious art, and that's why I think at Menil it's so interesting, the patronage in relation to religious work, whether it's making a chapel with the Rothko paintings or it's preserving Byzantine frescoes. The Menils singularly have seen a possibility that religious art can be contemporary art. Christianity and contemporary art have tended to be divorced, and I think bringing this here throws into light, in a way, how those questions have been really fundamental to forming the Menil's collection.
I believe on the main wall, 410, and probably another 60, 70 on the tables, plus a few dispersed here and there in the permanent collection. The presentation at the Byzantine Chapel is quite unique in the sense that it's one panel. We've never done a one-panel presentation before. So each new setting, each new layout is a discovery as much for us as for it can be for the spectator. I mean, it's a very different approach to see them all at once, in the sense that there is definitely a loss of a certain kind of discovery and maybe playfulness. But there is a sort of gain in terms of like having an impact, a shock when you enter the space and seeing the endless repetition of that one image. I can only hope that the viewer will take the time to get over the repetition first impression and actually start looking at the differences, because it's all about difference. You know, the more you look at them, the more you pick up the different interpretations and projections of each woman's profile. But that is not for me to say. I mean, we'll see how the public reacts once the show will be ongoing, if you want.